last words matter. They often reveal what we value the most. For example, Julius Caesar, his final words were et tu, Brute. He speaks to betrayal. Leonardo da Vinci's I have offended God because my work did not reach the quality that it should have. It speaks to regret. Oscar Wilde's either the wallpaper goes or I do, shows the importance of humor, even at the end of life's journey. All these final words, whether they're dramatic, regretful, or humorous, they remind us that what someone says at the end of their life's journey reveals who they truly were. And whether we're talking about an emperor, an artist, or a comedian, their final words pull back the curtain on what mattered the most to them. Even today, someone's last text, their last voicemail, or that last conversation you get to have, those moments have a tendency to stay with us. When someone's about to leave, or retire, or move away, or even take their final breath, we tend to lean in a little closer and listen a little more intentionally because what they say next matters. Those last words usually aren't small talk about the weather. It's about legacy. And if human last words matter this much, then the last words of Jesus should make us lean in even closer. What were his last words before he ascended into heaven? He didn't say, take care of yourselves, or stay out of trouble, or not even remember me. His final words weren't about safety or comfort. They were about purpose. He said, go and make disciples. Think about that. The last thing Jesus said wasn't any kind of goodbye. It was a go, which means it was an ending in a way, but it was also the beginning of a new movement that would change the world. He didn't really make a closing statement. Rather, he gave a rallying cry. You remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s final speech? It's known as the mountaintop message. He didn't know that would be his last, but it kind of sounded like a handoff. He said, I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. It sounds like he was, in a way, passing of the baton in a relay. He knew that the mission wouldn't end with him, and he was entrusting it to everyone who was listening that night and who would listen in the future and follow after him. It was like he was saying, continue to carry this very important mission forward. There's something powerful about a leader handing off a mission they believe in with their whole heart. And that's exactly what Jesus does, but on an eternal scale. He hands the mission of sharing the good news off to his followers and to us. It's as if Jesus says, my part is finished here. Now it's your turn to run with this. Jesus' words changed the world, and they're still meant to shape ours. Jesus didn't hand out a safety manual. He handed out marching orders. Let's read from Matthew 28, where this text comes from. Verse 18. Jesus told his disciples, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Jesus' last words, and now our first calling. This passage is what we refer to a lot of times as the Great Commission, you know, but it's not a pastor's job description. It's not just for missionaries who are headed overseas. It's for every follower of Jesus. If you call yourself a Christ follower, these are Jesus's final words to you. Our mission is to make disciples, not just converts. Jesus didn't say, go get people to say a prayer to me. He didn't say, go invite people to church and hope they'll stick. He said, go and make disciples. Okay, but what is a disciple? Well, in the most simple of terms, a disciple is a learner, a follower. A disciple is someone who is reshaping their lives around Jesus. Then discipleship never stays where it started. It keeps moving from story to story and person to person. And here's the key. If you're a disciple, you're meant to make more disciples. But what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean you have to have it all together. You don't have to be a Bible scholar by any means. You just have to be willing to pass along what Jesus is already doing in your life. Disciples make disciples because love always multiplies. And if the idea of helping someone follow Jesus is intimidating, trust me, I get it. I felt that way too, and I still do in a lot of ways. When I first became serious about following Jesus, I thought disciple making was for the professionals, right? Then one guy at work, we knew each other, but we weren't super close friends. But he knew I was a Christian and I was a pretty level-headed person, asked if I wanted to grab breakfast after work. We got off at 6 a.m, and before going home, he wanted to stop by and get some breakfast. He said, I just need someone to talk to. I panicked. I was like, oh no, where's the ministry handbook? We talked about life. I listened to what he had been struggling with, and then we prayed at that little booth at a no-name breakfast place in Modesto, California. I didn't impress him. I was barely holding myself together. But presence mattered more than perfection. That breakfast turned into a friendship. And our conversations brought him to a place where he was willing to go back to church for the first time in his adult life. He was willing to go to church with his family. And that ultimately ended up saving his marriage. That's what disciple making looks like. It's not about perfection. It's about presence. It's not about teaching from a pedestal, but walking beside people through life. Disciple making is meant to be a way of life. We tend to think disciple making happens in classrooms or through some program or maybe from up front at a church. But Jesus didn't run a seminar. He didn't hand out fill-in-the-blank worksheets. The people who were most affected by Jesus were the people that he walked with, the people he ate with, the people he asked questions to, the people that he listened to and corrected, and the people that he loved. And when you watch Jesus closely, you start to notice something important. The most transformative parts of his ministry didn't happen during the sermons. And he gave great sermons, but the most transformative parts happened during everyday life. Discipleship happens in the in-between moments. Discipleship happens over while having a conversation over coffee. Honest talks during a car ride. Texts that say, how can I pray for you today? Serving side by side with someone in a ministry, reading scripture together, even if it's confusing to the both of you. You don't need a stage. Nobody really needs a stage. You don't need to have a perfect plan. You just need to show up for someone and keep pointing back to Jesus. And that's the key. You need to show up for people, be present in their lives, and keep pointing back to Jesus. Don't forget that part. Always point back to Jesus. It's kind of like going to the gym with a friend, right? You might not be a personal trainer, but let's be honest, half the time you just need someone who won't let you quit halfway through the warm-up. But if you go together, you tend to push each other. You show up more, you stay accountable, and over time you both get stronger. That's discipleship. It's spiritual strength training. This spiritual training doesn't just make you stronger, it makes the mission more possible. And here's the best part. Jesus never calls you into something that he won't also walk with you through. It isn't just something that we do for Jesus, it's something that we do with him. And that brings us to one of the most comforting truths that Jesus ever gave his followers. You are sent, but you are never alone. The Great Commission starts with authority and ends in presence. Jesus says, all authority has been given to me, and I surely am with you always. Meaning, he's not sending you out there all alone. He is sending you out accompanied. You don't have to be fearless. You don't have to be flawless. You just have to be faithful, because the same Jesus who gave that command also gave the promise. He promised that his Spirit will be there to guide you, his power will sustain you, and his presence will be there to remind you that you're not alone. Now, maybe some of you are wondering, does my ministry really matter in the grand scheme of things? I'm a pretty small nobody. Does it really matter what I do? Jesus' answer is a resounding yes. It's like when you throw a rock in the pond, right? There's the initial splash, but then there's all those ripples that keep spreading out. And that's what disciple making does. You invest in one person, and then they impact others. And the ripples go further than you'll ever see. I want to tell you a story about the most spiritually significant guy that you have never heard of. There was a preacher named Mordecai Ham. He was not a famous guy. He was maybe regionally famous during his time as a tent revival preacher in the early 1900s. But then in 1934, this is his claim to fame, if there is any. In 1934, he was preaching at a tent revival in Charlotte, North Carolina. Two 14-year-old boys saw the tent. They saw this commotion of people, and they were curious, as most 14-year-olds are. But then as they got closer, they heard this bold love of God being taught. And they wandered closer, but there weren't any seats. So they began to walk away. But then this usher whose name that nobody knows his name to this day. Nobody knows who he was. But this usher saw that they were about to leave and ran after these two boys. He got them to stop and said, I can find you 2 seats. Then he walked them back, asked some people to move over, and found them some seats under the tent. That day, they gave their lives to Christ, and they committed themselves to making a difference in the world for Jesus. One of those boys is a man that we know as Billy Graham. Billy Graham has preached the gospel to more people than anybody else in the history of the world. It's estimated that hundreds of millions of people have heard him preach, and tens of millions of people came to Christ directly because of his ministry. The other boy was Grady Wilson, who ended up helping Billy Graham organize all of these evangelistic crusades. He changed the world. Not Billy Graham, not Grady Wilson, not even Mordecai Ham, but a nameless usher who served at a tent revival. That one man who saw some 14-year-old boys who were about to walk away from faith said, "Not on my watch." Your job isn't to change the world. Your job is to change somebody's world. Even Jesus started with just 12 ordinary people, and now there are billions. Someone's ripple can start with you today. That's what happens when people take Jesus' mission seriously. Now, maybe you're thinking, but how do I start? Well, it starts really simple. Start where you are and start small. Jesus builds big things out of small obedience. He fed 5,000 people with the kids' Happy Meal lunch. Imagine what he can do with your Tuesday afternoon. So step one, be a disciple yourself. That's the most important thing. Be a disciple yourself. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present. Spend time with Jesus. Read, pray, listen, and let your life be shaped by Jesus' way, not just his words. Step two, invite someone in. Talk to your friends in a casual way about what Jesus is doing in your life. Pray with a coworker who's struggling. Be present with someone who needs help. Step three, multiply what God has given you. Find someone to share what you're learning with. Be honest about your struggles. Engage someone who's further behind on this journey than you are. Someone did that for you, and their courage might be the reason why you're here today. You don't have to have all the answers. You just need the willingness to walk with someone towards Jesus. This isn't theory. All of us are here today because someone, maybe it was a friend, maybe it was a neighbor, maybe it was your parents, maybe it was a stranger, but someone took the time to walk with you because God grows people through people. You know what's funny? Jesus could have said a lot of things in his final moments with his friends. He could have said, "Be safe. Don't mess this up." He could have said, "Please stop arguing about who's the most important person." But instead, he said, "Go." Just go. That's the heart of our faith. It moves. It doesn't stay in a building. It's meant to spill out into the world. It's meant to spill out into coffee shops and classrooms, into workplaces and family dinners, into hard conversations and small acts of kindness. And here's the best part. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need a theological degree or a ring light for your testimony video. You just need a heart that says, "Jesus, I'll go where you lead, and I'll bring someone with me." The gospel was never meant to be kept secret. It's a story that's meant to be shared. It's the kind of good news that is too good to keep quiet. So maybe disciple making doesn't start with the big speech. Maybe it starts with taking someone out for lunch, or a text that says, "Hey, I've been thinking about you," or an honest conversation that ends with a prayer. That's how the kingdom grows. One friendship, one conversation, one yes at a time. Every moment of God began with ordinary people saying yes to an extraordinary challenge. So let's go. Let's go make disciples. Let's live sent lives. Let's fill the world with ripples of grace and stories of renewal. And know that Jesus will be with us every step of the way. The greatest adventure of your faith begins with 2 steps: following Jesus and inviting someone to follow with you. So, church, let's take these steps together. I hope you have a great day. I look forward to seeing you again real soon.